Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Jay Allardyce, one of the board members and co-founders of GenAI Works. We're super excited to launch a new series, and I'm really humbled to be able to lead that as a board member to help have some conversations across the GenAI Works community. And this is a inaugural set of conversations that will continue, where we're intending to really bring some top level impact value, some guest speakers, thought leaders, execution leaders in the market that are helping many of you who are building to position and create value using AI tools, but also more importantly for solutions that you're using for your customers. And so a bit of what we've got going on. So we've got the next hour here. I am joined by my co-host and my guest, so Rob Kaminski, who is the co-founder of Fletch PMM. I will give Rob here a day in the sun to talk a little about himself, but I'm super excited to kick off the series with Rob, because we are in such a race when it comes to AI. And what I mean by that is not of the investments and what's happening, but it's the understanding. And so one of the premises that we had with GenAI Works that started 2 years ago was an effort to help society discover, learn, and grow through all things AI. What does that mean? It means that to your job, to your role, to your industry, to your function, it is touching everything that we do. And what is super exciting, though, is helping to demystify that, because ultimately it is one of the biggest transformational changes in the market that I've seen in my 25-year tech history, and I'm sure others had even longer. And that is, it is a massive opportunity for upskilling. So with that, one of the big things that we're committed to as a company is helping our broader community understand and bringing the best to what they can do to position not only their career, their opportunities of where they're working potentially in enterprises, or building the next startup. And so this is a series that we're launching to help have some of those conversations. And so the first one up is going to be here, as we said, B2B positioning in the era of AI. And so maybe, Rob, you want to do a quick intro of yourself, and we'll get rolling.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. Really appreciate you having me. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rob Kaminski, one of the co-founders of Fletch PMM, and our business wholly focuses on B2B positioning. It's all we do. We've had the fortune to work with almost 500 B2B startups over the past few years, taking them through our process to help them figure out all the ways they could position, making some of the tough choices and trade-offs about the best way to do that, and then getting it documented in a really, really clear homepage. And so I'm pretty pumped to be able to share a little bit of our methodology and then weave it in to, like, what does this mean with AI and what's happening in B2B in these AI markets, with things to think about for founders and marketers.
Awesome, Rob. Well, we both laughed as we saw this. We said, wait a minute, this looks like our avatars are going to be the ones doing the discussion. So
way to stay like on theme, right? Like the bots are taking over the V1.
Exactly. So Rob's humbled by what he's done, and he's not so boisterous about it, but as a trained engineer, has now gone through product marketer, and helping so many startups. I think why this is so critical for companies or individuals that are looking to build the next product, the next solution, for the very reason that we'll get into, that it's becoming a lot easier to ideate, the ability to start something. So what's going to be so critical is how you learn how to position that, whether you've been a marketer or someone in a different part of a business line. But I think Rob's expertise is really going to help to solidify that. It's going to help you as an individual really think through that value for your end customer, your own company, and how that positions itself in the market. Okay, so got some preamble slides. So we're going to talk about four big things. So one is, what AI is changing in B2B marketing. Two, really, who's really driving your business and the growth, and how do you reach and activate them. And third is, we'll do the deep dive with Rob into testing that positioning and getting some hands-on mechanics. And then there's some things that you can take advantage of as we go. So it starts off with my viewpoint of, do you have my attention? So let's just step back. Every one of us has an inbox. It is inundated. You're getting hammered with content. And it's a best of the intent coming from individuals, right? However, there is so much information coming at you, you don't know what to pay attention to. So when the Transformer paper came out that helped to really galvanize and explode the latest formations we've seen of Gen AI and other forms of AI, usage, the paper being aptly stated of all you need is attention, papered after the view of the Beatles, all you need is love. My question in the consumption of these technologies or applications that are powered by AI is, do you really have my attention? Right? And we live in such a social driven world where you are constantly interrupted. You have a split second to understand and stay with something versus not. And so this is why the power of this positioning is so valuable. So Rob, maybe just some of your thoughts as you've seen over 400 customers, why this is going to be so critical going forward.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed a lot of the key ones. I want to run a little experiment on you, Jay, to like build on this idea of attention. And so I'll put you on the spot a little bit. But this idea of, do you have my attention? But then also, will you remember me? And so I'm curious, have you guys bought any B2B product in the last 6 to 9 months? Anything come to mind? What would you guys buy? What? And it doesn't, I don't need it. Like, what was the tool? Do you remember like the category or the thing that you bought?
Yeah. So the team bought some capability for mobile interactivity for crowdfunding. So how do you reach your end audience in the medium of being mobile? I think it was Klaviyo as an example.
Okay.
Right. So, but it took me a minute to like when you said it, I'm like, okay, which use case? How?
So you bought Klaviyo, or you bought a tool that helps you with Klaviyo? I just want to make sure I'm following.
We bought the tool itself. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And it was a mobile. It sounds like a mobile. What would you call it? A social. How would you describe the tool, or what was the use case?
So as you look at, let's make sure I've got this right.
Yeah. No wrong answers.
Yeah. So the intent of it had been is as a company can go out to crowdfund. One of the ways to reach out to their audiences, through the actual usage of interactive mobile might be a text and an engagement and what have you.
Got it. So like a mobile engagement tool for your crowdfunding use case. Name to me vendors in that space. Like, what are the names that come to mind?
Couldn't tell you all of them.
And it's this right here when you talk about attention, and it's also this mental availability of, do you have recognition? Because this is how, like, that type of question is how we see a lot of like buying processes start. Of like, hey, I'm looking for a payment tool. Do you know any payment companies? And like, the only one I can come up with is like Stripe, maybe Mercury. And there's a bunch of research on this. What people found is that for any given like use case or category, people can only remember like the top 3, maybe 5. And so we have this attention, but we have this remembrance issue of like, can you stand out and can you get people to then stick in their minds so that when the conversation comes up, you will bubble up? And taking this back to what we've seen, it's freaking crowded out there. Like, it's incredibly difficult to even get the first attention, let alone then have that hook that stays through, like that through line of like, and they'll remember us, they'll talk about us later. And so like, this to me just hits so core to what I'm seeing in B2B marketing is, and I think we're going to get into it, like it really does put the premium on marketing more so than product building. It's kind of a very weird time for start building a company.
Love it. And it's a great test, as you just did, right? That remembrance is so much, and it's only going to get more challenging as more applications come out. And so I think the thoughtfulness for builders, and whether you're an established enterprise trying to redefinitionalize a product and a position, or you're a startup coming out and trying to then challenge against incumbents or others, so critical as we go. So on that, to that point, we've said, as we think of GenAI Works, one of the big things has been this mission of helping, again, society discover, learn, and grow through AI. But there's a tremendous amount of that unpreparedness across the board, despite all the investments. And so, as you just said, Rob, like, if you can't remember something, well, there might be some apprehension in the fact that people don't understand how to use some of these tools. People are eager to adopt, but maybe organizations aren't allowing them to do so. Maybe they don't know where to find the right ones. And so a lot of that can come with positioning. And so I think there's this kind of interesting opportunity where we'll talk about this a little bit later, that education in many ways, especially for tech products, has been an after sale thought, right? You sell something, you know what, you do a demo, you get a POC, you sell something, and all of a sudden, here are the things you get after that. We can help to implement it. Oh, and here's some training and resources, like way down the list, right?
Yeah.
One of the things we're seeing is education is now becoming a forethought versus an afterthought. And that may be a great way to help people make them more comfortable with the tools, but also make it much more of, wow, I understand this. This understands the use case, what have you. So I don't know if you've got any reactions to this in some of your experiences too.
I do, yeah. Like this, the way we look at AI here, and it's really important for everybody to remember, AI is just the technology, right? And so it's creating this big shift for B2B organizations for how they do things. And so from a marketing perspective, the challenge we have is we have to educate people on AI. Hey, you should be using AI. And then we can educate them on why they should use your product after they've adopted this idea of like, yeah, I'm going to start following AI's new way of doing things. And this is really tricky because it's a ton of effort to do this education. And the example that comes to mind is like you look at other major technology shifts, right? The internet. And you think of some of the more successful entrepreneurs and companies like Amazon. And Jeff Bezos has talked about this. He wasn't out there evangelizing the internet. He looked at it and said, hey, this is going to be a thing. And he said, I'm going to let everyone else do the education. And he focused his education on better way to buy a book, point blank, period. All right. And so we run into this challenge sometime when we're positioning AI companies where when we go to position the product, like the, hey, better way to buy a book, sometimes we run into these awkward scenarios of like that activity of buying a book doesn't exist yet, right? Like these workflows and use cases aren't even there to where you have to then educate people of like, hey, you know, this big goal you have, there's a whole other way to get there. And it's only when you get them there, then can you sell them the product. And so the insight is like really being selective about how difficult of a market are you going to go after. And when you're creating a new market, you're basically doing this category creation effort where all the education is going to be on the technology with the bet that if you're the ones to own that, then they'll consider your tool. And where the bad stuff happens is this mixed thing of like, you should use AI and you should use our tool. And it's too many messages. It's confusing. There's different levels of awareness in there. And so this is a very, I love this slide, it's like a very relevant thing of like, do you have to do the education on the tech yourself? It's kind of a different effort.
There's so much to unpack in this, I think, for founders or scale ups, and again, or established companies. There's always this argument of niche down to win and focus on that outcome and that problem you're solving versus wait, but this is such a bigger opportunity for us. So we should talk about horizontal, right? It's the classic case of vertical and horizontal. I love where if the power of AI and one of the biggest opportunities, I do believe, because of context, is focusing on domain. And where you have the richness of being able to then focus on a specific problem and an outcome to a given set of buyers that are very deep and rooted in what they do. Now, that's generalistically staying, but I think you've uncovered a big challenge for companies as one, you're trying to get into AI hype and therefore have a lot of messaging around AI. But if you're not clear to the outcome of the thing that it's doing for your end customer, you might have to, help people. And maybe in this positioning thing, as we get into it with you, is one thing I'd love for you to help unpack is how do people think about niching down to find that beachhead to win, to then be able to expand that 5 to 50, 50 to 100, and then be able to say, well, wait a minute, this really has platform value. How can I evolve from that?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Let's dig into that when we go. Okay, so this one's an interesting one. So I want to step back into first principles. If I think about the fundamentals of business, it's actually pretty simple, but we humans have really made it complex. And what I say by that is, we look at, like you said, you challenge me on what did I remember about the tools, and you're drawing a blank face. Is so many new tools are coming out, people are unsure of how to use it, but we have to step back and look at the fundamentals of how business works, and then maybe some of the challenges. So there are 4 things in my mind. What we hope to do is build great products or services. Number 2 is be able to attract and convert those customers. 4th is to optimize the price, the margin, the value, both for the company as well as the customer, and then be able to retain and expand those customers. Like, from your perspective, Rob, I mean, this is pretty basic, right? But it is tried and true for any company, whether software or otherwise, that is building value for their customers, right?
100%. And what's interesting is I see this top level and I see a lot of companies try and position at this altitude, and they struggle because they end up competing with all the things someone might use or do to reach these goals, right? Like, and we'll see this in my slides as well, but like, we're a better way to attract customers. It's like, great, you now are competing with every customer acquisition tool out there, all the different activities people are doing. And so when we come back to, do you have my attention? Can you get awareness that way? You're making it freaking hard. You're basically expanding the competition set because the devil's in the details of what people are actually putting their energy into to reach these goals. And that's usually where we find the niching down opportunities.
Yeah, I love it. So, and then what we actually do is a lot of stuff beneath that, right? And whether that's, from a process perspective of how a company operates to, we haven't even layered in here the various systems or tools. All right, I'll give you control there, Rob. So obviously there's a lot of complexity to that and across the board, but I think what it comes back to sometimes is as we get into this positioning view, it's so important because as new products are being launched, if you're on the receiving end of that, you don't know where to start and stop. But if what it is you're trying to simply do for your customer, how do you constantly try to simplify this? How do you try to think about what work can be automated using agents? How do we think about how things change? But always reverting back to the simplistic principles, I think are key. And so in that, some big things that we're kind of seeing as these big four pieces are being reimagined. The crazy thing, obviously a lot know and who are following us in this broader community is building products is becoming a lot easier. Now, the engineers out there will say, hey, we're not there yet. And I agree, right? However, the ability to ideate, the ability to quickly get to prototype and conversation versus I have to write it all down into a PRD and hope someone else understands it. And then I get some feedback from design and then back to, like, you're going through endless cycles. The ability to take that idea and bring that into fast form is super valuable to actually then help you immensely in that early positioning. The second bit of it is, in this attracting customers, we do see that scaling distribution is changing massively and very, very quickly. And then down the line, great opportunities ahead. But I don't know, Rob, like as you think about, you said it earlier, this positioning aspect is going to be as valuable, or if not more valuable, than it is of building the product and how really bringing the two together, where PM and PMM are kind of, one. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's interesting to see this slide. We're going to see a similar slide of mine, which I'll race by. But the AI building in particular, when you look at what's driving this need for distribution, there's never been more competitors in the space, in every space. Go to G2, go look at any of the MarTech diagrams. Now everyone is a builder. So now there's going to be even more companies in here. And then with marketing automation and all these AI content tools, just pure noise. And so like, I think I did a post about this a while ago where like 20 years ago, the biggest risk was like, can you build the thing? Right? And it was like engineers, we need to be able to build the thing to where the best tech would win. They're just like, it's easier to stand out. There's just less people and not many people are building. Not everyone had access to the tools. No code wasn't a thing. And now that everyone's building, it's really good for the market because we're getting faster iteration cycles to eventually get to these great products. And so this distribution mechanic like is startups is kind of how I look at it. And so like finding ways to solve for distribution ahead of time, and you have to treat it like the product itself because it truly is the hardest thing to build. And I worry for some of the technology focused founders where they kind of tend to throw up their hands and say sales and marketing's not my thing. It's like, well, okay, like then you have some choices. You have to either go learn how to do that, or you need to go find a co-founder that's going to do that for you. Because today, building a great product, is plain and simple, is not good enough.
Yeah.
If you don't get the attention, people are going to scroll right by you. And this is why it's interesting. Just kind of insider story. I have a buddy who leads a big product team over at Microsoft, and they're launching this like healthcare AI tool. And Microsoft has incredible distribution already. They've got tens of thousands of sales reps. They've got existing partner relationships. They have a brand recognition. And I'll never forget that he was, because we worked with a startup that was kind of in the same space, but they did not have the distribution advantage. And you look at their go-to-market and even the first year of the thing, the startup without distribution is like struggling. How do I get attention? How do I even get people on the phone? And I talked to my buddy who's launching this AI product. He's like, oh yeah, the first year we'll be at 30 million ARR. We already have deals sold. And because all that had to happen is they're like, hey, sales team, we got this new product coming. Bring it up to the existing customers and start selling it. And so that is where this advantage for these incumbents, where they have this distribution mechanism already in place, it's a huge edge. And if you can't build it, you really then only have one other option. It's like you have to niche down and go to a space where you can actually get the attention.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. So I think it becomes a viable and very powerful superpower for startups coming out is you may have the ability to build fast, but you have to think about the engineering aspect when it comes to distribution, and those two hand in hand and constantly evolving. And one thing we've always talked about too is there's a dichotomy of product leaders, right? A very strong technically oriented product leader says, you know what, I'm just going to then give it to marketing and sales to figure out how to sell it. Or there's a commercially oriented product leader that feels the accountability to win the first 5 customers, the first 10 customers, and really thinks about it from a market perspective. So obviously one of the big things with AI and agents in particular, you're starting to see roles collapsing in companies, right? Where an athlete, they can really think about building a product, but how to position it into the ecosystem with an end customer may prevail than someone that is just purely technical. So it's not wrong. It's just this evolving of roles, which I think is all just happening in front of us as we go right now. All right, so I'll speed up a couple things. So let's get to the meat of it. So one of the big things in this attention deficit economy, we've seen just a lot of people talk about is distribution and new moat. There's probably arguments on both sides. But the fact is there's a lot of things that have evolved from traditional B2B. And so one of the things we've seen, the company has seen as a part of GenAI Works is that this learning journey is evolving. So whether it's short snippets of information, trends, deep vertical content, simple how-tos, to hands-on and curated events, things that are really around building audience and intentionality. And I think this is, again, if you were to map it to all the other B2B things that people can pull out of, the quiver, so to speak, I think there's a galvanization here where, it's changing the way we consume information. I mean, LinkedIn is becoming or has become a massive procurement channel because of building awareness of your product and who's engaging and how they're engaging. I don't know, Robert, if you've got any thoughts to it as well.
Yeah, it's funny. I look at the slide. The only thing I'd change is I would put lines connecting everything. Like we think about this as marketers and salespeople in terms of like funnels, and there's like some merit to doing that. Very rarely though are people, all right, I saw you on social, and then I saw your trend report, and then I went to your, I'm like going through each of these steps. And so like finding really what I see in this is like you have to stay consistent across all mediums and all channels, and be really hyper aware of like, what is the likely awareness where that person is at. And so like the problem I usually see with startups when they think about this, and you mentioned it earlier, like education now needs the lead. When people think about marketing their product, they're like, oh, I got to go start talking about my product. It's actually the wrong approach. In general, you should be going and talking and educating about the problem your product solves. Because at an awareness level, like most people are like, oh, product, scroll, swipe, it's an ad, it's an ad, it's an ad. But you have to give value first. And I think that's what I see in all of this is these are all value giving elements. And they usually have very little and almost nothing to do with your product. They're all about the context and circumstances of your market and your audience. And I think that's what actually works, right? Like even building distribution and moat. People follow people that they trust and are entertained by, not by people who have the coolest ad or logo of their product. Like that's
well said.
Read between the lines here.
Okay, a couple more and then we'll get to the real deal. So, sometimes some people may resonate with this as startups get funded. Like you said, in the last, handful of years or decades, has been a lot of money focused on build. And then figuring out what I should go say and how I should go sell it to a market. And then maybe we should do in some investment on the delivery side. And so there's a lot of things that people could go do in a traditional sense. And some are relevant, some are completely not. I think we've entered a different view where when we think of this notion of build and delight, and there's a go-to-market may have a greater degree of investment. In your delivery, it's subject, I think, partly because it's a function of what you've built as a product. And so with that, how are you thinking about perhaps maybe simplifying this? And in my viewpoint, it's been around the brand. And if you think, like you said, Rob, about creating category and trying to just not simply disrupt a market, but position the value of what it is you're doing such that it creates remembrance and awareness. The second piece is audience. There's been some great companies out there touting about audience building, and I've been a big fan of it for various reasons because, as you said, you follow certain folks because you're learning from them. You see the insight and the intent of what they're providing, and that creates community. It creates value. You ascribe to that. And that last part, though, is you need to be very clear about the value that you're bringing to your end customer and potentially your end customer's customer. And then what that translates, for you. And so often that is like it happens at some, esoteric messaging. But to me, when that all comes together, it creates trust. And that trust flow comes back in a constant cycle to continue to build and iterate on the product in a way that is allowing you to not think about, well, do I have a bunch of support tickets I'm trying to solve? And therefore, I got to take that back to engineering and have someone go solve those things. How do you start to have much more of a social listening aspect that can help you to really better understand where your customers are? Okay, I think we've got one more. So there are so many great topics happening out there with highly respected and regarded marketers, CMOs, B2B leaders. I just happen to be a part of listening to some of those great folks, such as Rob. But there's a lot of things that are unpacked in conversations, from SEO being absolutely disrupted because of AI and how you're showing up in the search index if you're going to Claude or if you're going to OpenAI. Two is potential around the audience building with attention, really trying to be clear and specific around the group that you're working with and trying to expand that audience. And how do you keep fueling the right type of content and insight back to that is valuable. Third is this education as a new influencer. So we've got a point of view where influencers 1.0 had been all about the clicks, the likes, and how many follows on YouTube and the excitement. But a lot of folks really could not go deep in a particular product. I think there's absolutely the greatest opportunity right now where solopreneurs and others can be great, deep educators, helping people understand more about their product and actually creating a whole new revenue stream and value for companies as doing that. And the last part is, focusing on the outcome. Can you be clear in the value of what your product actually brings to your customer? I don't know, Rob, you probably may add a bunch of things to this list, and but anything that strikes you as one of the biggest challenges we're seeing this far.
I think really it's a double down on what we've been talking about of like the education and the audience building. I think the black box right now is a little bit of the GEO. We just got our first couple leads from ChatGPT, and we had no idea how we even got in there. I think it actually just builds on top of the existing infrastructure that's out there in terms of social, in terms of what it references. But no, nothing major to add. This is great.
Okay, all right. Well, let's get to what matters most. And so there is that big but. Everything we just kind of talked about, you can throw out the window. And what I mean by that is if we're not clear on how you position what it is you do and how you can communicate that not only to the market, but to your own organization, the rest kind of is just things that you can do to try to build. But I think the clarity of this, and that's really where Rob and team have come in. So as we've said in the beginning, Rob and Anthony have built a great company that I think has done a wonderful service in so much helping startups, but others understand a very clear, methodical, calm method to break down your positioning and how that then shows up in the product, on the website, and other mediums and properties. So without further ado, I'm going to give you the floor to dive into why people are here. All right.
Yeah, let's do it. So excited to share. Basically, what I want to get into is I want to share some key principles about how we look at B2B markets, implications that we've already kind of been hitting on with Jay of like, what does this mean for AI companies? And then I want to walk you through our methodology. We have kind of a main conceptual framework for how we think about building positioning narratives by introducing a concept called positioning anchors. And we'll use a bunch of examples throughout this. I hope my content's about 15 or 20 minutes. I want to keep it nice and tight and leave plenty of room for questions. And so I would ask the folks that are here, drop questions in as we go. Jay's going to be collecting those. And also for any brave souls that want me to take a look at their homepage, we can do those live at the end of the session as well. And I'll share with you kind of what I see and where there might be opportunities. And so I'm just going to dive right in. What I'm about to share, we have basically battle tested with almost 500 B2B startups to date. And so that while there's a lot of like conceptual elements, these are all like rooted in reality of like how you actually go about creating a positioning and turning it into clear messaging. We've also worked with quite a few service-based businesses and creators because they sell into B2B markets, and the frameworks and models actually work quite well for them. And this kind of gets into like foundationally, what the heck is positioning? I think we should be working from all of the same place here. We see positioning as really a simple thing. It's really answering a few basic questions of who your product's for, what is it, and why is it better? And as Jay really hit on, we do this, if we get good answers to this, we do this in order to actually get attention and that remembrance, that space in a prospect's mind. And so another way to look at this is, these are the three questions. What is the thing? Who is it for? And why is it better? Super simple. You might think, oh, this is easy. It looks easy, but I'll tell you, there are a lot of bad answers to these questions that we see a lot of startups make. In particular, in answering what is it? When we see a lot of bad answers, some of the stuff we see is answering with that outcome that we talked about. This is sort of putting the cart before the horse, where it's like, oh, we're for increasing revenue, or for making your team more efficient, we're for building great products. It's like they don't even know what you do yet. And so it's not that outcomes aren't important, but when people are when you're trying to establish this conversation, this is bad. This does not hit the mark. We also see people answering with their mission statement. We're democratizing the logistics industry. And it's like, okay, but what the heck does that mean? You know, this is something that maybe your investor or VC might care about, because they look at your product a little differently. They care about the industries and the markets. Your customers don't. They care about themselves. And the third answer, and this should hopefully hit home for the AI folks here, is just answering with their favorite feature. Oh, it's AI powered. Like, they're speaking to the technology. It's like, yeah, but what is it, right? Like, okay, it's AI powered. You know, this might get you funded, and this is why everybody's slapping AI on everything. But it doesn't answer that foundational question. And what this brings us to is actually one of a first principle that we have, is that people cannot evaluate your value or your differentiation until they understand what the product does. Put another way, people are more likely to buy your product and engage with your sales process if they know what it is. And it sounds simple. It sounds trivial, like, yeah, duh. But it is amazing how many startups, founders, and marketers ignore this principle. And when we see this in the wild, we end up seeing messaging like this: one workspace, endless solutions, orchestrate powerful business solutions with a single source of truth. The only limit is your imagination. I mean, imagination is the word here. Like, you have to really come up with your own thought of what this thing is. And so their argument of single source of truth has no context here whatsoever. Another one: software that keeps you running while you keep the world running. Very clever, but not very clear. It's not answering that core question, right? It's like, okay, it's software, and you're making this argument that yours runs, but like, what software for who? What is the thing? One of my favorites: put yes to work, save or grow, satisfy shareholders or satisfy customers. When facing tough choices, choose the one platform that lets you say yes to both. This says a whole lot of nothing. In fact, it's like got questions where it's almost like, what are they even trying to say, right? Not answering the core questions. And my all-time favorite: making smart smarter. Learn about our smarter solutions. And so this principle, everyone can agree with it, but it often gets ignored, and it's a foundation of really good and solid positioning. And so what this means is, when we work on positioning, before we can even get into your differentiation or why it's better, we have to root our framing of our audience and how we're going to go after them by answering these two questions first. What is the thing, and who is it for? And I'm going to share with you different ways that we approach answering this. But before we do that, I got a few more principles I want to share. Principle number 2: being well known for one thing is way easier than trying to be known for many things. Relative to AI, I see this mistake happening a lot, because AI is making it easy to build a lot of things that do a lot of stuff. And so it's kind of this trap, because then you run into this issue of like, well, how do I carve out this space? And even when you think about the most successful companies out there that are like, have multiple products, and you could argue are known for multiple things, they generally have one area that they are referenced as. Like, this is what stays in people's minds. Figma is known for designing, Cursor for coding, Stripe is the payments tool, Salesforce is that CRM, right? But these companies, Stripe has 19 products that go well beyond payments. Figma can be used way more than designing. Salesforce has basically a conglomerate at this point where they build tons of products in all these different industries, but yet this is what everyone remembers them for. This is the starting point. which is a good thing, right? This is where you get that remembrance. And I mentioned Figma. Like, I'm in Figma right now, right? There's a world where like Figma could be the presentation tool, right? The design tool. We actually run all our workshops in Figma, but no, their primary positioning is in one specific space, and then they can support it with these other elements, but no way are they known for this. And so the takeaway for actually, no, a couple more things. When we hit on these, I'm going to fly through these. This principle of focusing on one thing has never been more valuable to understand for the three reasons that Jay brought up. There's literally hundreds, if not thousands, of companies in every category. Like, this is just like a MarTech landscape. I'm sure we've all seen a version of this. There's more people building, right? Like, vibe coding is a thing, and sure, it may not be all the way there, but it's pretty darn close with all these stories coming up. We've actually built and shipped a couple of products on our own, and I'm not a developer. And then when you pair this with all the noise that's out there, people's attention spans are just shrinking. And so marketing automation plus this AI content creation, your ability to stand out gets way harder, infinitely harder, when you try and do this across multiple fronts. And so that you have to focus is really the core takeaway here. In this era of AI, the all-in-one sort of positioning piece is not usually a strategy that an early stage startup can take on. It's a requirement to really narrow your focus and making the hard trade-offs. All right, principle number 3 that we believe in. Your homepage is the best place to document your positioning. We get exposure to hundreds of startups, and what's interesting is some of them are doing the hard work of positioning, but they're putting it in a Google Doc. And I've seen these things. They're dozens of pages long. They're very verbose, and everyone gets excited at first, like, oh, we wrote all this down, but then it gets put into a Google Drive folder that nobody reads. And so when you put your positioning front facing on your homepage, it's really powerful for a few reasons. Number one, the clarity it gives your market and your customers is like the key win of like, this is how we're going to show up. But number two, it also keeps your teams aligned. Like, they have this recognition of like, like that's how we're going to present ourselves to the market. And so when you think about even that journey slide that Jay showed, it allows you to create consistency both up funnel before they even get to the page, and then even down funnel related to how the product and service is going to work. And so the last thing is the homepage is a awesome litmus test about how clear your positioning is, because most folks, when they go to write this, they think it's a copywriting exercise, but it's really freaking hard when you haven't made any of the tough decisions about who you're for with the core positioning and the arguments you want to make, right? It becomes very, very challenging. All right, principle number 4 here. Champions, and this is specific to B2B, but champions matter more than decision makers. For whatever reason, and maybe it's a sales culture thing, we tend to put an emphasis on decision makers because they sign the checks and they sign the contracts. The issue is they're very rarely involved in the buying process of tools. They usually come in at the end. And there's a bunch of studies. One of our partners, Winter, who does message testing, they did a big qualitative study of this. And what they found is that only 13% of executives actually are a part of the finding, evaluation, and decision-making process of buying a product. Instead, what tends to happen is it gets delegated to someone who's more middle level. They go do all the legwork, and they do the internal really negotiations with all the stakeholders, and they bring it to the executives for final sign-off. And so what this means, the implications from a positioning standpoint, is in your main positioning and the majority of your marketing, you should be speaking to this champion, not the decision maker, because they're not going to make it to your site. They're not going to engage with your marketing materials. They've got businesses to run. They've got teams to manage. You're just one of hundreds of things that they have to deal with, where the champion is closer to the problem, where they're actually going to pay closer attention and even care about the product more. All right, last principle here before I start sharing kind of the methodology we go into. And this one might be the most critical as far as how we see B2B markets. But B2B software is workflow software. I love the slide you had, Jay, where you talk about these outcomes. But when you look at businesses, like first principles, what is a business? A business is a collection of people, human capital, and a bunch of operating procedures that people run. And what's happening is, though, that human capital is just running these SOPs, and they work in this system to get their jobs done, to build and ship a product, et cetera. And so when we look at markets, we think it's far more powerful to segment the market based on those activities, those SOPs, because that's where people are actually spending their time. And this is very different than how people segment B2B markets today. If you ask most teams, like, hey, who's your ICP? You're likely going to hear stuff like this, like, oh, geography, business model, industry, growth stage, department, role, tech stack. Yeah, we're going after, insurtech companies in Atlanta, and we're specifically targeting the ones who use AWS. It's like, okay, like, and these are helpful. Don't get me wrong. Like, we will use these, but these are secondary segmentation elements. And so in our model, we think that workflows and use cases are far more powerful ways of defining your ICP, and they also shape potential avenues of framing your positioning. And so I want to double click on this. When I say workflow, and I may use some words interchangeably here, I'm literally talking about the set of activities that your market would be doing where your product might actually fit into or replace or augment. But this is where they're at, and we have to meet them where they're at. The idea is you should be able to visualize them doing these things. If you can't really visualize it, it's probably not a workflow. It's probably not an activity they're doing. That's why the goals don't really work here. And so these are things that should live on someone's calendar, or you see them in job descriptions or in a project dashboard that they're trying to actually work on these pieces. And when we frame the market this way, it opens up a lot of different avenues. So let me demonstrate this. When we look at B2B markets through the workflow lens, we start to see pictures like this. And there's a couple insights you have to understand about these workflows, about these use cases. And so if we take a high level workflow of like doing outbound sales, that's an activity that a lot of B2B organizations are doing. We have to understand that, well, that workflow can actually be broken up into sub workflows. To do outbound sales, I got to build an account list. I got to build an outreach campaign. I got to execute and track the campaign. I got to train the team, as well as a bunch of other things that they got to do. This isn't meant to be comprehensive. And even these sub workflows can be broken down. It's like, well, when it comes to building an account list, I got to source the leads. I got to verify the data. I got to enrich the profiles. When we look at markets in this way, we actually see these as different sub markets that could be positioned for, where you could say, that's where my product is really, really good. And this is where we find those narrow wedge opportunities. And what's interesting is a lot of the companies in this list are very big companies. I'll call out Clay. And their positioning has shifted slightly, but their primary positioning for the past several years, even as recent as early this year, they were just saying they were a better way to enrich profiles. That's it. And here's the thing, Clay's product actually addresses the majority of these other activities and workflows. But if they were to try and bundle these up, ultimately what they'd be saying is Clay is a better way to do sales, better way to do outbound sales. And what's happening is when you go to these higher levels, you now suddenly start competing with all the activities and methods that people are doing to do outbound sales. And that's where it's just harder to stand out. And so conceptually, when we work with startups, we're trying to help them find the right level of specificity in defining their audience and the activity that they're for. And then once you're in, then your sales process can upsell and cross-sell and educate across all of these other things. And so back to the core, right? Those are the principles that we've used to kind of develop our framework. How do we actually answer these, right? Like what are the methods and what are some examples of these, how these look? And the way we do this is by using what we call positioning anchors. And so think of a positioning anchor as a heuristic for explaining what you do. It's a shorthand reference point where some products are hard to explain and it might take you 3 minutes. We're looking for phrases or words or reference points where if you said it, people are like, yeah, okay. Now we're in that right domain where you can have a conversation around value and even make an argument around differentiation. And there's 3 main anchors to consider here. And the idea in our framework is that you must have at least one of these as a starting point. Otherwise, like, you don't really have a definition of your market and you don't have a reference point to explain. And so the first one I'm going to walk through is kind of building on the example I just shared, is the anchoring on a workflow. And so what does this look like? When we anchor on a workflow, it's better to just share this through examples. So Vanta did this, and I believe they still do this. I could be wrong. They may have broadened a little bit. But they basically, if someone was explaining Vanta, they would say, oh, we're a better way of preparing for a SOC 2 audit. When they say this specific workflow, the idea is like, this is the activity that their audience has or is dealing with, where they go, okay, I can already orient myself around everything else you're going to say. And so they get to frame their whole argument around this workflow. And if they wanted, we could build on, like, how is this getting done today and why does it suck? But it might be a bunch of things. And so them just saying, hey, doing this activity is really time consuming and tedious, we make it simple. In that 5-second explanation, people get it. And they start to get a sense of like, okay, I know what Vanta is doing here because they've been so explicit. Calendly is another major example here, where for the past decade, they positioned as a better way to schedule meetings, just this hyper-specific workflow. And what they also have here, and I could have added this as well, they are positioning directly against sending back and forth emails. And this is the power of using this as a leading anchor, because it lets you then ask the question of, how is this workflow getting carried out today? And whatever that answer is tells you what you're actually competing with. And it kind of brings up this other sub insight in here. So many startups we work with think they're competing with the other startups that are in their space that are going after these opportunities. Not really. In most cases, startups are going after the legacy status quo, which is usually doing things manually, or in the age of AI, doing things with more rule-based automation tools, where now people are trying to introduce the agentic. And so this framing, again, anchoring on workflow, will allow you to solve for this argument of differentiation to frame the argument. One more example, Retool does this, and I'm calling this one out because there's a argument to be made here that this is too broad of a workflow, because building internal software is sort of a big thing that's made up of a bunch of things. It also brings up the question of what type of internal software would they be building? And so there's certainly opportunities to make this more specific, but same idea here in terms of the main framing of what does Retool do? And I think they actually do a decent job of it at this altitude. Important considerations of this one. The audience you're going after has to understand the workflow. And the risk in using a broad workflow like doing sales is that everyone might have their own conceptualization of what doing sales is. Doing sales in my business is basically taking incoming sales calls for people who've seen us on social. Doing sales in other businesses is sending a bunch of cold outbound emails. Doing sales in another business is going door to door, events, right? This can mean a lot of different things. And so when you have to be able to say it and the person be like, yeah, I know exactly what that is. And it should also start to frame up the competitive alternative set. And so what we see conceptually is we're looking for this sweet spot of what is the right level of specificity where our differentiation and our messaging can shine relative to the size of the market we're going after. There's always this tension because everyone wants to win the sales market and no one really wants to win the just sending email sequence market. But this might be a stronger positioning that then will let you proliferate into these broader markets. Okay, second anchor here to introduce, and this is anchoring on a product category as a reference point. A couple examples of this. Pretty straightforward. It's basically like, what is your product? Oh, we're a project management tool. When we get this framing, what's interesting is it actually almost brings along the competitive alternative. Like the framing just comes with it. When you say you're this tool, you almost then have to explain why you're the best version of that tool for a given audience, right? And so it almost brings this with it of like, well, you're almost speaking against other project management tools. And then Jira here, again, I don't know how great of a job they're doing at it, but they're making this argument of like, hey, our tool can be used by everybody, where these other tools are more narrow in terms of departments. Klaviyo is an interesting one here in the way they're using this, because this reference point, they're actually pulling from a different industry. And so Klaviyo, for those who don't know, is a big Shopify platform. Pretty much exclusively B2C businesses use their product. And they're borrowing CRM from a B2B context, because B2C companies like Shopify stores, they don't really think about it in terms of CRM. But what Klaviyo has started to do is they're saying, hey, everyone knows what a CRM is, even if you don't have one. And they're using it as a way to introduce what Klaviyo's main differentiation might be. And they're really saying, hey, because we're thinking about this more holistically like a CRM for B2C, it's easier to keep track of the customer journeys and the interactions, right? So that when you say this, you already get a sense of all the things you might be able to do with Klaviyo. And then I'm actually going to speed through for time. We don't have to go through another example. The same consideration happens here with product category, is the category needs to be understood. The danger zone that we see some folks fall into is the temptation to position in an emerging category that not everyone's aware of. We saw this a lot with product-led sales platforms, where everyone wanted to say, hey, we're the product-led sales platforms. And this was like the end game and Pocus and all of them. What's funny is that category never materialized. And so they used this reference point, but then we're going after an audience that was like, what's a product-led sales platform? Like, it just doesn't, like, it's no good way to land the initial conversation to then frame the value. And then this third way, kind of the final way. And again, the idea is we're using multiple anchors, but a leading anchor, one route is competitive alternative. And this is when you're not willing or not able to position specifically on a use case or a workflow. And also you don't want to jump into a category for various reasons. Slack did this quite well, where they basically, instead of saying, because their workflow is sort of like communicate or like team communication, but it's pretty broad and squishy. But when you say, hey, we're out to replace email inside of your company, suddenly when you say that, everyone's like, oh, like they're going to put their own vision into it. Like, oh, this is where I could communicate with customers or do this. And it let them then frame the argument of like, hey, it's easy for things to get lost. We've built things in a way where it's very organized. Everything gets a dedicated thread. And so again, using competitive alternative to sort of sidestep the vague workflow and making this argument hyper specific. Here's another one, a company we worked with that I think is doing this quite well. They've leaned into this strategy almost to an extreme, and actually it makes it sharper. They are trying to piggyback on all the spotlight of Clay, because everyone kind of was learning about Clay. They've got the big fundraising announcement and all this. And so for them, rather than trying to like re-explain all the things that Clay does, they just say, hey, we're the alternative to Clay. Because when we talked and learned about their product, they really saw it as like, you got to be a go-to-market engineer to use Clay. It's super powerful, but it's wildly complex. And so their whole framing made sense to just anchor directly against a specific competitor rather than a category or a method. And then Loom did this as well, where they positioned themselves against meetings internally, so somewhat similar to what Slack did with email. And what happens when you pick this anchor is, again, that you almost pull along what the workflow could be as a way to frame the argument. And so what we're almost doing here when we're working with companies is I'll call it like positioning algebra. It's like, what's the main anchor to frame it? And then can we solve for the other pieces as a way to actually build out the argument? And so these anchors are what we use. And I guess the last one here on competitive alternative, there's a theme here as well. It's got to be specific. It's got to be relevant to the audience. And the nuanced thing here when we talk about this specific nature is what you're almost doing when you're picking these anchors for the narrative structure is you're also shaping who your ICP actually is. It's kind of like two things are happening when you make these decisions, because your audience has to have an awareness of what these things are, right? And so this goes back to what I shared earlier of like the firmographics only take you far enough. It's more, what are people aware of? What are they actually trying to do? What are they using today? What tools are in place? All really powerful reference points for framing your argument. And then the last bit here, and I'll fly through this because I do want to get into some of the questions and breakdowns. How do you then translate this into messaging? And so I'm actually going to take this last example by Loom. And what we're doing here is like, this is the positioning, answering those basic questions in our model. They mainly anchored into meetings, and they used it to discover what the workflow is and how they want to frame the problem in order to then deliver this argument of differentiation. When you solve this, the next step to do messaging is just to double click. It's basically like, all right, how do we defend this? And what we use in our process, we've developed a canvas for this that we call our positioning and messaging canvas. And the way to read this here is basically this top row and these three columns is just this here, just these decisions that we've made. And most often what happens, if you are able to back solve for the workflow, all you're really doing is saying, hey, if meetings are a bad way to carry out this workflow, and we're saying Loom is a good way to carry out the workflow, then the supporting arguments are like, hey, how do you actually carry out this workflow? And so in Loom's context, it makes sense to use our model more as a step-by-step. It's like, well, first you're going to record your screen, and then you're going to edit if you need to, and then you're going to create and send this link, and then you can actually track who's using it. These are the main components that defend this argument as a better way to carry out this workflow. And what usually happens when we get to this point is there's often a conversation around prioritization, because the mistake we see a lot of companies make is they think that the more they share, the more valuable the perception is, but that's not how the customer actually realizes it. More information can actually harm you. And so what we usually end up having to do is we have to leave out some features. And the questions we're asking, and this goes back to the first principle, is like, we think about the journey. You're not going to sell your product in one message. And so this is where you get really, I would say, like go-to-market funnel specific, is how much information do they need to take the first step? And most often in B2B, the first step is either trying out the product or stepping into a demo call. And you don't have to say much to earn the call. If you say one intriguing thing, they're gonna be like, oh, I gotta at least check this out. Like, that's what we're after. And that's where in your sales process, you can then expand and explain all the other things you're doing and all the other bells and whistles that you've built. But the idea here is like, this is our version of that messaging canvas in a one sheet. And then the idea is to translate this into the homepage, which we have some structure for where in the hero, you want to hit the main positioning, who this is for, what is this thing, what's the differentiation, using the elements that we have. And then and sometimes we'll do this, we'll double click into the problem and be like, well, what is the problem of the alternative relative to this new thing? We're sort of telling them again what this is. And then we do what we call the 10-second demo, where it's like, what are the supporting arguments for this thing? And again, sometimes they're step-by-step, sometimes they're just key points. The idea when you're doing this on a homepage, put an emphasis on the headlines. People skim and they scan. And so the idea is if you just read these headlines, fast recording, edit the video, share your Loom, see who watched it, you'd understand kind of the defense of this overall argument of a better way to update the team. And so I'll pause there. That's really our methodology, or the core concept that we use in Anchors. And so this is probably a good time to open it up, Jay, to questions, and we could start looking at sites as well.
Yeah, you bet. Rob, thank you for that. That was a lightning round of goodness, so much to take and unpack there. We got just a few minutes left before we wrap up. Let me grab a couple comments. There's a lot coming in, both on the LinkedIn side as well as on the Zoom here. So maybe a couple easy ones on the LinkedIn side here. So what's one word you'd ban from startup homepages forever, and why?
Yeah, everyone is probably the one word. And I'll stay away from the buzzwords. To me, whenever I see everyone, it just tells me that they haven't actually done positioning. They're stuck in the like, this is going to be for everybody, and going into everything we talked about. It's just a signal to me of like, oh, this isn't really purpose built. Which, sure, if you're super successful and you're the Airtables of the world and you want to do that, that's fine. But I actually think it's doing a disservice for anyone who reads it.
Awesome. All right, one more on the LinkedIn side, and we'll do one on the Zoom side. So another one is, how can early stage founders differentiate between a positioning issue and a product market fit issue?
Yeah, I think they're really closely held. So when we look at product marketing when we look at product marketing or positioning, we think it's the like other side of the same coin of product strategy. And so in there is fit. The way we break this out with relative to product market fit is that there's a component of product market fit in our understanding of, can you get in front of your audience enough, and can you get them to actually take a meeting and buy? We consider that more go-to-market fit, more on the distribution side. The product market fit that most people speak to, they talk about like more problem solution fit. Like once we get people in, are we solving the problem in a key way, and do they stick around? You need both. I would put more of an emphasis on the end-to-end product market fit. Is like, you got to have fit distribution-wise, and you got to have fit problem-wise. And it's kind of the old like, if a tree falls in the woods, did it make a sound type of a thing, relative to like, yeah, if your product actually solves the problem in a 10x way, yes, so what if you can't get anybody in a room like this to talk about it?
Got it. All right, last one, and I know we're at time here. This one's from Russell on the Zoom side. Great questions, Russell, all the way through. I'm going to pick one. I think it's a tough one for you, Robert. You just walked through a great framework, and that is codified knowledge of expertise and learnings that you've had over the years and with working with customers. What about identifying that and making that a system that can be trained based on the knowledge you have? I mean, you too are also under threat of this transformation. How would you think about it?
I love this question. So first off, we are attempting to do this. You're looking at, lead vibe coder. I'll say second lead. Anthony's maybe a little bit ahead. But here's the funny thing about my business and industry, and I think we're going to see this play out across B2B, is consulting is one of those things, like people pay us for our advice, right? Like you come to us for our frameworks, but you're looking for a perspective and advice. There's this funny thing that happens where we've worked with so many companies that sometimes in the first 30 minutes, like I've already looked at all their, so I have some context, but sometimes in the first 30 minutes, I kind of know the answers or potential answers. But the issue is if I just come out and say, hey, Jay, here's your answers in the first 20 minutes, your first thing's gonna be like, wait, what? Like you came up with that in 20 minutes? And it's like, well, yeah, this is like all we focus on. Like I've seen all the patterns and I know what you're doing, but there's this lack of trust. And so the known unknown is, how are people going to react when strategies are getting developed by AI, when we agentify our process? Will you follow through, or do you need a human in front of you basically giving you the discipline of like, no, like you need to do this, versus, oh yeah, here's your answer. And I don't have the answer. The thinking is we are approaching it more from an internal tooling side. I think it's going to be a while until you can delegate trust to the AI. And I think that's just going to be a time horizon type thing.
Yeah. I think you said it best to sum it up. It is that trust. And right now, humans trust humans to a degree in all things. And the ability where the agents can be an assist in supporting a better packaging and a positioning and usage of it. And I think we're ways away from that. The opportunity of what you just walked through, though, I think is just gold. So I really think it's powerful, and I want to thank you for that. And then I'm just going to throw up two just quick commercial things as I've been instructed to do. So let's see here. All right. So folks can, if they want more to talk with Robert, you can hit the QR code there, talk Fletch PMM. I'm sure the team would be happy to. Two, if you're looking to build audience and distribution, you can hit up the GenAI Works team there. And then two other things that are up is a big event in Silicon Valley. It is the epic event of GenAI Week, bringing great speakers across various domains and really helping to impact the future and now of AI. And the last is when you do want to get hands-on, you can join one of the fastest growing hackathons that is truly helping people become the builders that they are. And in final, the next series, as I said, Robert, thank you first for being the guinea pig and joining this conversation. And I really am thankful for you because positioning is so important going forward to even have any of these conversations as we think. And so the next one up will be a tough one to follow, but Henry She's going to join in July talking about the AI Lean board. If you have not seen this, I highly recommend you go check it out. It is all about how can lean startups ultimately build and become $1 million ARR per employee companies using agents and the way they think about building their companies, not just simply the products and how they position. So, but with all that, again, I want to just simply say to Robert, an opportunity here to say thank you for making this a great session and being a part of this and helping us kind of kick off some of the discussion for everybody. And what I think is most memorable for me throughout this one is you've taken something that you've crafted, that you have learned through so many different startups, and something you have a deep passion for. You can see it, you can hear it, others hear it. I just encourage that, and I encourage every builder out there to tap that passion, because we're in this era where you can truly build and be that solopreneur. And Robert and Anthony are a great testament. I know you just hired some new folks, so saw that as you expand, but look forward to partnering with you as we go forward.
Thanks so much, Jay. Really great being here. Looking forward to the next one.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, everybody.
Cheers, y'all.
Bye-bye.